UFC Fight Night 107 is coming up this Saturday, March 18th from London, England. 13 fights will be exclusively shown on the UFC Fight Pass, with the main card of 4 fights kicking off at 5 p.m. Eastern, 2 p.m. Pacific. Before I pick the 4 main card fights for that card, let's get to last weekend's action, UFC Fight Night 106. That took place down in Fortaleza, Brazil at the Olympic Training Center. 6 fights were shown on the main card. 6 fights were also shown on the undercard. Getting to the undercard real quickly, had a really nice performance and win by Michael Prazeres as he was able to defeat Josh Berkman. It looked as though after the fight that Josh Berkman retired. He left his gloves in the cage. Maybe he goes for one more. Probably not going to be back in the UFC. Of the 6 fights since his return to the organization after his run, including a championship in the World Series of Fighting, has gone 1-5-1, with that one being a no contest in 6 fights, performing at 2 different divisions. Welterweight when he initially came back. His last couple have been at 155 pounds. Hasn't really worked well for the longtime veteran Josh Berkman. Gets really torched in the first round here by Prazeres, as really Prazeres came on him really fast, hit him with a variety of different punches. Berkman was really never able to recover. The fight went to the ground. Prazeres was able to work into a north-south choke, seal it up tight before Berkman had any chance to clear the cobwebs. Tapped at 142 into the first round. Really good performance by Prazeres, but Berkman, you can definitely tell this is a guy that at this stage in his career trying to go down, when weight cutting's not as, it's starting to become less and less of a popular thing to do, cut a lot of weight. He's obviously older now. It's harder for him to maybe match the speed of some of these guys at 170 or at 155 after competing at 170 for so long, but it may be the end there for Josh Berkman. Jeremy Kennedy picks up a nice win over Hani Jason. Paulo Borrachinina, if I said that correctly, making his UFC debut over a solid fighter in Gareth McClellan, was able to knock him out in the first round. Very impressive debut for the Brazilian in his home country. Definitely an up-and-comer guy in the middleweight division. Also, one of the bloodiest fights I've ever seen, and it was crazy because it was from an incidental headbutt as Joe Soto took on, long time, I guess you could call him a gatekeeper in a sense. And I guess they're now calling him Ronnie. It used to be Hani Yahya, but now it's Ronnie. And Ronnie Yahya, a very bloody affair which saw Joe Soto walk away with unanimous decision victory. The cut was courtesy of Joe Soto, and he was leaking all over the canvas, and they really did no attempt to wipe up any of the blood from the canvas. So one of the bloodiest affairs that happened from something that was unintentional, but Joe Soto, the former Bellator champion, probably walks away with the biggest victory of his career, defeating Yahya in Brazil. Rather forgetful fight between Sergio Moraes and Davi Ramos, with Moraes getting the victory. And then he didn't get a performance of the night, with Paulo Borrachinina with his first round knockout and Prazeres' first round submission. I could see how those two got a bonus, but I really think Kevin Lee should have got a performance of the night bonus, because that first round went really bad for him against Francisco Trinaldo. Trinaldo did a great job keeping a lot of combinations going, got Kevin Lee hurt, went to the body a couple times with some kicks. Kevin Lee was in some bad trouble. Looked close like he actually may get submitted. One of the drops led to Trinaldo getting the back of Lee. Lee was able to stay strong. And then the second round, his coaches say, hey, maybe not try to box him, throw more kicks. He seemed content to just throw hands. Ended up going high with a high kick. Rocked Trinaldo, was able to transition, get the back, and sink in a rear naked choke. This is I think this is the biggest victory of Kevin Lee's career so far. Not only beating a guy the caliber of Francisco Trinaldo, but Trinaldo, I believe, was on an 8-fight win streak heading into this bout, beating him in his home country. Really big deal. Afterwards, of course, as we know, Kevin Lee, a native of Detroit, much like myself, said he's going to bring MMA back to Detroit. And I think, even though having Kevin Lee making big wins like this helps the UFC bring a fight to his hometown. However, with our very brand new Little Caesars Arena coming to downtown Detroit. Obviously, that would be a perfect place for the UFC to come to. I have a feeling that they were going to come here in probably the next year to have an event at our brand new arena in downtown. So I got to believe that, coupled with Kevin Lee being a big-time deal, he's going to be placed high on the card. I would expect that. They already have a lot of their books for the summer. I don't know. The debut event for Little Caesars Arena is going to be early September, so the earliest they could probably book a event for the UFC, and they may already have a date, who knows, would be September, October. But obviously spots are filling up probably quickly for the new arena. And obviously they got two teams now going to be playing the arena in the Detroit Red Wings and the Detroit Pistons. So time is filling up as far as this year already goes, and we're only in March. So, but I believe it's going to happen soon. Anyways, big win for Kevin Lee and that end of the undercard, which was on Fight Pass and Fox Sports 1. Kicking off the main card, Alex Oliveira against Tim Means. Alex Oliveira has been a guy that has been traditionally, I would say, more of a stand-up fighter. But in this fight, he really showed his grappling ability, which at 170, he hasn't showed as much as he did at 155, obviously being a really big lightweight. Obviously, he showed that against Will Brooks. But in this fight against Tim Means, he really just did not allow Tim Means to keep the fight at range and allow Dirty Bird to accumulate a lot of output in terms of strikes. And I really think that was the key. And that's really, Tim Means does have power, but he kind of accumulates on you. He really wears on you. And he really can pick apart guys from range. And I think that was something that was starting to happen when they first met before the illegal knee hit there at UFC 207. And I think Alex Oliveira and his team kind of went, not quite back to the drawing board, but they kind of realized, like, all right, we're good at stand-up, but this guy's pretty good at range. And even though we're a tall guy for the class, 5'11", 6 foot, obviously good bulk and muscle. Now this guy's 6'2", he has a little longer reach, a little longer height. We're not used to dealing with people of that size. We got to bring the fight to him and see if we can get to the inside and try to neutralize that. And that's exactly what Oliveira did. Did not really allow Tim Means to get a lot of separation from him. And looking over the stats courtesy of Fight Metric, 11 takedown attempts with 6 landed, 4 inside the first round, 2 in the second round, not really allowing Tim Means to breathe. And Tim Means, a guy that I would say that, puts a lot of output on there. Only 41 strikes in about a round and a half. That's pretty low for him. So I think Alex Oliveira did a good job of shutting down the range striking offense of Tim Means. Was eventually able to work for a back position. Means kind of, I wouldn't say, I could say he kind of slipped up a little bit, let his neck out there. Alex Oliveira was able to take advantage and get the tap there at 238, and very impressive performance. I think the biggest win of Alex Oliveira's welterweight career so far, and obviously I think that's where he belongs, is welterweight, and definitely a guy that, if he can put this together, what I think is already pretty good striking, he's definitely be a guy you're going to look out for, because he has a lot of talent, he's very athletic, and he's a very strong guy, even though he's fought some of his career at 155 pounds. Speaking of, somewhat forgettable, there was a draw here in our next fight in the women's bantamweight division as Bethe Correia took on Marion Renault. This fight was kind of destined for a draw if you look at the stats. The first round very close. Correia did land a takedown, but Renault did outstrike the Brazilian 32-23. However, I did thought Bethe landed a little better of the power strikes. So that one was really close. Second round, I really think did belong to Bethe. She had a takedown, did have some control there, and also did outstrike Renault 33-32. So I think that round was definitely Bethe. She was starting to come on, and then in round 3, Renault was able to drop Correia and just stayed on her pretty much from the start of the round to finish. Definitely deserving of a 10-8 round, and ended up outstriking the Brazilian 89-12. Came close to a couple of submission attempts. Looked like she might get a knockout, but Bethe stayed strong, was able to come out that round. And if you had it scored like I did, the first 2 for Bethe, 10-8 for Renault in the third, you get a draw, and that's how 2 of the judges saw it. With one of the judges, Marco Borges, if I said that correctly, he actually scored 2 rounds in favor of Renault, giving her the win on his card, 29-27. But I had a feeling that Renault needed a finish in that round, and she acted like she did. She came out guns blazing, came very close to finishing the Brazilian, but the 10-8 just makes it a draw. So not a loss, but a draw. Betch had a lot of antics in that fight. She was kind of dancing afterwards, and I wasn't really sure why. She seemed surprised at the draw, but to me, I think it was very apparent. I mean, if you have any knowledge of this game, you would see that a draw is a very likely possibility. And if you were confident you won the first 2 rounds of Betch, you had to know you've lost that 3rd round. You got completely dominated in that round, and you had to know that was probably going to be a 10-8. I mean, even there's no way that's a 10-9. I don't know any judge that really scores that a 10-9. It has to be a 10-8. So I think Renault maybe had a feeling that it might be a draw, so I didn't like the antics for Betch, but that's just her obviously fighting in her home country. And a draw doesn't really help either girl much in this division. A win by either really would thrust either back into the title picture at the women's 135 division. But with the draw, really doesn't help either. Really, especially Renault. Obviously, she's a little older in her career and is still looking for that signature win on her resume to really propel her into the top 10. Hasn't got it yet. And kind of unfortunate. And the thing, even though Renault had a great 3rd round, it wasn't so great of a fight that it's probably going to get run back. And both girls just don't move it anywhere. That's kind of the cost of the draw, especially when it's towards girls that are in the top 15. It really doesn't help them out much moving forward. Next fight of the evening, speaking wins in the top 15, another big win for a young guy. Ray Borg gets the biggest win of his career as he was able to beat Jussier Formiga 29-28 on all 3 cards, as this was a unanimous decision victory for the Taz Mexican Devil. Very close fight. The first 2 rounds, I think you really could have won either way. I thought Formiga definitely won round 1. He outstruck Borg 28-15. Was 0 for 2 on his takedowns, however. Round 2 definitely was very close. Neither landed a takedown. 0 for 1 for Formiga, 0 for 5 for Borg. But I think with that pressure moving forward, even though Formiga did outstrike Borg 15-8 in overall landed strikes, probably would have gave Borg that round. And then the 3rd round, it wasn't officially a takedown. I think it technically was a slip or drop, but Borg was able to get control, ended up outstriking Formiga 30-1, and laid the majority of that round on top inside a guard, and I thought doing a really good job staving off submissions and obviously controlling Formiga, maintaining that ground position. I thought clearly took round 3, and it's crazy that this fight had a couple of ground instances, though neither fighter was credited with a takedown. Formiga officially 0-3 and Borg 0-6. Kind of crazy when you think of how much, especially that 3rd round, was spent on the ground. And Borg did overall outstrike the Brazilian 53-44, and also threw more strikes, was more active, 105-77. However, I did thought Formiga looked really good in his feet. He's obviously improved, and so did Borg. Because I thought Borg, if he had the left to be on his feet, I thought it would kind of go badly for him. And even if he took the fight to the ground, I thought he would have a tough time doing what he did, especially in the 3rd round. So I think Ray Borg really matured, and as much as I kind of hated on him for was on him for missing weight in his fight against Luis Smolka, I think he definitely proved that he took this camp more seriously, took a step up in competition, and I thought performed really well. I think from start to finish, it's his best performance of the UFC, and was able to beat the best guy he's ever fought. Ray Borg is also a very young guy too. I believe he was born in 1993, so I think he's only 23 years old, about to be 24. This was only his 13th professional fight. So this is a guy that definitely is the future of the division. I think beating a guy like Jussier Formiga this early in his career is a really big deal. And with Mighty Mouse having so far beat just about everybody, he's taken on a guy in Wilson Hayes who hasn't really beat too many guys in the division, if that shows you anything. And also they did a reality show pulling up guys who either had fought or undiscovered guys in the UFC just to pull a challenger for Mighty Mouse. That goes to show you they are looking for challengers. So with Ray Borg getting by Jussier Formiga, that puts himself in a very favorable position to get a shot at Mighty Mouse, because everybody else has pretty much already got one, and so far has not been able to defeat him. Next fight of the evening in the lightweight division, a amazing knockout and definitely deserving of a performance of the night bonus, as once again Edson Barboza was able to do it. And really, this is a fight that I believe Barboza was losing, even though I picked Barboza to win. But Nuri Dariush, again, a guy that most people know for his jiu-jitsu, but a guy that is a very talented striker, stands southpaw, trains with a lot of great kickboxers, chief among them Giga Chikaze, who, if you don't watch Glory Kickboxing, one of the top featherweight kickboxers in the world, and that's one of the guys he trains with. And I really thought that Dariush was winning that fight. He was doing a good job with his rear leg kick, which is his best weapon, and it seemed like Barboza had trouble finding the range, and Beneil Dariush using that mainly hit the power back kick, but he even used some from front kicks too. His kicks were really keeping Barboza at range, and I thought confusing him. Not to mention, I thought Dariush was having good footwork. I think the southpaw may have affected him too. I know a lot of people don't like to bring that up, even though Barboza is a talented striker. Every time you face a southpaw, it's not something you prepare for a lot. As much as you do in training, it's different when you got there, especially when you got a high quality level southpaw like Beneil Dariush, and I really think he was kind of taking it to Barboza a little bit there. 28-17 in terms of landed strike, and also Dariush was more active, 67-46. Only tried one takedown. He's not great at takedowns, but he does have a good jiu-jitsu game. So if the fight did go to the ground, you would have to favor Dariush. And then the second round, Barboza, I think, went back, readjusted. I think was realizing he started to throw more kicks, and I think that started to help. And I think he got around to not only figure out the attack, the footwork, but also combinations and timing. And that's how he got that knee, because Barboza saw that on, I think, two occasions, three, where he was setting up the jab and immediately going into the takedown. And so he knew that if there was another jab, he should try to counter either with an uppercut or a knee. Ended up being the knee. He countered it perfectly flush. Dariush went out cold. And once again, Barboza walks away with his hand raised and another highlight knockout, this time in the second round at the 3:35 marker. And huge win for Barboza. Again, his third victory in a row, his third victory over a top 10 opponent. Well, Melendez was unranked, but Melendez is a high-quality fighter. Now his third in a row. And again, a fight that he was, I think, losing. I think the second round was going to pretty even, but I would think if the round continued without that knee, maybe give Dariush that round. I mean, there was still a minute and a half, but Dariush was performing very well, but Barboza was able to make an adjustment, see an opportunity for a counter, took it, and it paid off for him. And now Barboza puts himself in a very good position moving forward. Obviously, the division is kind of in a logjam right now thanks to current champion Conor McGregor. And I don't know, it's going to be interesting because you would think on paper Tony Ferguson should be the next one to fight Conor McGregor sometime here in the next few months. However, there's all this talk about Conor McGregor fighting Floyd Mayweather. I don't know. To me, Tony should get Conor McGregor, shouldn't have to fight anybody else. So if that indeed is what's next, that leaves Barboza to fight somebody like a Khabib Nurmagomedov, which I think may be for the next kind of number one contender there. I know there's a lot of talk that Khabib doesn't want to fight during Ramadan, which as far as I know is like a month or two or something. It's definitely a good chunk of time, but you know, that kind of holds back the division, I think, a little bit, and I understand it's a religious thing, but as far as that goes, that does kind of, because then you leave Barboza in a situation where he's already beat a lot of the top guys. Where does he go from there? And he has to take on someone that maybe he shouldn't have to. Now, of course, Eddie Alvarez is taking on Dustin Poirier, but that's, I think, not until May. So the winner of that could very likely fight Edson Barboza, perhaps Khabib. You know, who knows, maybe Tony Ferguson takes another fight due to Conor. I'm not really sure what's going to go on, but I think Barboza against Khabib might be something that may materialize here in the summer or in the next few months. But Barboza definitely puts himself in a very good position as firmly one of the top 5 155-pounders in the world. Next fight of the evening was the co-main event. That was in the light heavyweight division. His former light heavyweight champion and Pride Grand Prix winner Mauricio Shogun Rua took on Gian Villante. And I think Villante in this fight got too caught up in a brawl and played really right into Shogun's hands. I think at this stage of Shogun's career, he hits hard, but is a guy that's not as well conditioned. He's not as athletic. He's not as fast, and he's not bouncing around as much, and he's not doing as much output. And I think Vellante took a couple of those shots and really then just kind of, it was just two guys plotting and trading. I mean, it was a great fight, great action. But I think Vellante, kind of lost his way a little bit. He wasn't throwing as many combinations as he typically does. He wasn't moving his head. And I think a guy who you would consider a little more athletic, really maybe maybe not at any stage, but this guy's a pretty athletic guy, Gian Vellante. I think we can all agree to that. And a guy that does throw good combinations, a guy who has been known to kind of bounce around a little bit, and I think he kind of stopped doing that and let, at this stage of his career, a little slower Shogun really able to capitalize and really play into his game, which is just banging. And if you're going to just bang, Shogun can do that. He can still do that. He can still throw hard. Power's usually the last thing to go from a guy, and I think Vellante played right into his hand. I think once it turned kind of into I'll hit you a couple times, you hit me, into kind of a barroom brawl type of fight, I think it really played into the hands of Shogun, and because of that, Vellante really started throwing combinations, and by the time it got to the third round, Vellante was barely moving at all, and Shogun he kept on coming. And in fact, Shogun had pretty good output for a fight that went about a minute into the third round. Ended up landing 94 strikes through 174, just 55 landed for Vellante. And I think a lot of that was Vellante not adjusting and just simply trying to stand there and trade with Shogun, which obviously proved was a bad idea. Shogun gets his third victory in a row. I'm not really sure. I mean, Vellante obviously drops out of the rankings, and I think for intensive purposes, if he wanted to make any run or be a champion, I think he kind of missed his window. I don't see Vellante really changing much in his game to become a champion at any point. I mean, he's a solid fighter, but I don't think he's really going to go any higher than what he was entering this matchup. Shogun, a guy who looked like he was relatively, you could say, done after his fight there against Brandon Vera, where he had lost 4 out of 5 fights, including getting knocked out or getting finished. Three of those 5 fights. Getting submitted by Chael Sonnen in August of 2013. He did have the one at that time brief victory over James C. Hunna, and then he lost twice in 2014, getting knocked out both times, once by Dan Henderson and once by OSP. Looked as though Shogun may be done, but after defeating Little Nog in August of 2015, he has now rattled off 3 consecutive victories. However, he only fought once in 2015, once in 2016, and so far only fight here in 2017. Obviously, it is March. He was born in 1981. I think they saw he's like 38, I think. Yeah, 38, 39. So I don't know how many more fights he have left. Obviously, there is a fight coming up in Rio this summer. Anderson Silva has already been announced to be taking on Calvin Gastelum. We're going to have Jose Aldo against Max Holloway to unify the interim and featherweight championships. I believe there's going to be Jessica Andrade will be taking on not Jessica Andrade. Claudia Gadelha will be taking on Carolina Kovalkiewicz. So some big-time fights already announced there. Obviously, Vitor Belfort said he would like to retire with one more fight at that event, so there's a fight there. He said he wouldn't like to take on a fellow Brazilian, so that obviously Anderson is now taking on Calvin, but it leaves someone taking on like an Anderson or a Shogun Rua. But we could very likely see Shogun added to that card. Let's see, he already fought Corey Anderson. Obviously, Jimmy Ann was fighting Corey Anderson this weekend. Potentially, he could face, if Jimmy, I think win or lose, he could face Jimmy Manuel. I think that would be a fantastic bout. Those two have not crossed paths yet. I think that could be a likely scenario. Perhaps, maybe, I think Misha Krunkanov actually just got a fight. Otherwise, I'd say maybe him. But that could be a possibility. We'll see how this weekend's card goes. But I'm really trying to scratch maybe Glover. I don't know. We'll see. But if you still want to bang, Shogun can do that and proved it. And put a good effort and ended up getting himself one of those bonuses there at the end of the night. Actually, he didn't get a bonus. I'm sorry. Barboza did. Barboza, Perceres, Paulo Borgia, and then, of course, the main event, Calvin Gastelum against Vitor Belfort. as much as I like Vitor, and I did pick him to win this fight, again, I went atrocious on this card, just going 1-4-1. I kind of went with my heart a little bit. Gastelum's a guy that, his speed, he was able to take a couple punches, and I think his speed was a big difference. Vitor wasn't able to do a lot in that department, and Gastelum just kept on coming. Obviously, being at this weight class, he can kind of throw with a little more abandon. Obviously, he knew Vitor wasn't going to really take him down, so that allowed Gastelum to kind of really just strike at range. He has good footwork and really just kind of waited for his opportunities, kind of rattle off 3 or 4 at a time, and just kept on coming, hurt Vitor bad, and just kind of took his moments, saw that opportunity to clinch, went full force after dropping him another time, and got the finish there in the first round. Another impressive performance by Calvin Gastelum. He now moves to 3-0 at 185 pounds, and this is 3 in a row overall because he did have a victory over Johnny Hendricks at UFC 200. Now scheduled to face Anderson Silva, and what could be Anderson Silva's last fight. Obviously, he kind of sounded like he may retire after his win over Derek Brunson, but obviously now being in his home country of Brazil could very well be his last fight as well. So Calvin Gastelum, if he beats Anderson Silva, that's 3 victories over guys in the top 10 in the middleweight division, even though they're all aging guys in Vitor Belfort, Tim Kennedy, and Anderson Silva. That's still a big deal. And if he's able to do so with 2 of those coming, in the backyard of those guys in Brazil, that's incredible for this young kid. And for a guy that obviously was kind of maligned a little bit, missing weight, I think that he should just stick at 185. I don't think you should put your body through that. Again, you're just going to have a longer career. And I think his speed at this division, I think, makes up for the height and reach disadvantage that he's going to have against most guys. And I think because of the fact he's not really cutting weight, he already proved he had pretty good stamina when he was cutting weight at 170. I remember him going 5 rounds, as they mentioned on the broadcast, against Neil Magny in pretty decent elevation there in Mexico City and looked good. So that's something that he's going to have in his back pocket, is going to be cardio. And a lot of times, some fights come down to that. It's just being the fresher guy. And Calvin Gastelum is a guy that can definitely go 25 minutes in this class, no problem. So I think he should just stick there. And obviously, if he keeps on knocking off top 10 guys, why bother trying to cut that weight and put your body through that symptom and perhaps miss weight and, again, lose out on a potential person? Obviously, it hurts your reputation as a fighter when you do miss weight. And that was UFC Fight Night 106. Before I get to UFC Fight Night 107, real quickly, World Series of Fighting has an event. That's going to be on the same day, March 18th. However, it's going to be later in the evening, as the UFC card will kick off at 5 p.m. Eastern. This will be on NBC Sports Network. It's going to be from the Turning Stone Casino Resort in Verona, New York. Main event will be for their heavyweight championship, as Sean Jordan will take on Blagi Ivanov. Definitely, I think that's going to be a really good scrap. Looking forward to that one. Looking at some of the other fights on the card, Lance Palmer will be in competition as well. He will be defending his featherweight championship, and that should be a really good scrap. I think his name is Andre Harrison, who he'll be taking on. We're also going to see the guy that he beat for the championship, and Alex Almeida. He'll be on the card. It looks as though he's going to be on the undercard, which I find interesting. Also, one of the prospects there coming out of Jackson Winklejohn, Phil Hawes, will return. He'll be taking on Elijah Winter. Also, Steven Seiler, former UFC and Titan FC fighter, he'll be taking on Hakeem Dawodo, if I said that correctly. Also, another former UFC and Ultimate Fighter guy, Matt Secor, will be taking on Akbar Nurmagomedov. And also, Bekbulat Magomedov will be taking on Donovan Freelo. That looks to be as though that's going to be the main card here for World Series of Fighting 35. Really excited by the main event. Ivanov's just a guy that he's kind of a brawler. Sean Jordan's, I really like Sean Jordan in the UFC. I thought he was a really good fighter too, so I think this is going to be a pretty solid fight. Looking forward to it. The last Ivanov fight was definitely a really bloody and great fight of the night. Maybe the best fight World Series of Fighting had in 2016, so looking to kind of re-up that performance here in 2017. I believe this is the first I think this is the second World Series of Fighting card this year. A lot better than their first one, in my opinion. So I'm looking forward to that this weekend as well. World Series of Fighting 35. That'll be on Saturday as well. Getting to the UFC though, 13 fights, as I mentioned, will be shown. Actually, they canceled one, so it's actually going to be 12 fights. 8 will be on the prelim portion of the card, kicking off at 1:30. Pretty decent fights highlighted on the undercard. One of the guys to beat Conor McGregor, one of the few guys to beat Conor McGregor, Joe Duffy. He re-signed with the UFC. There was kind of talk about him possibly going to Bellator or another organization. He'll be taking on Reza Madadi. Also, one of the top prospects from England, Tom Breeze, will take on Uwali Bambos. Very interesting. Bambos, I thought, was a solid 185er. He's going to be dropping down to 170 to take on Breeze. Breeze suffered, I believe, his first loss in his career in his last fight, so it'll be interesting to see how he bounced back against the guy that should be a really big welterweight. And Bamboos here, the holy war angel in England. Also, Leon Edwards will take on Vicente Luque. Luque had a great performance at UFC 205. And Leon Edwards has been very solid so far in his UFC career as well. Looking forward to those two. And I think those are the 3 fights I would look out for. There's one more. Daniel Omachuk against Tim Johnson, a matchup, believe it or not, of 2 top 15 heavyweights will take place as well. So those are the 4 fights on the undercard I would look out for. Those start again at 1:30 Eastern on the UFC Fight Pass, with the main card kicking off 5 p.m. Eastern, with 2 prospects in the featherweight division, as England's Arnold Allen will take on Makwan Arakami. Looking at Arakami, guy definitely that's a bright prospect in the UFC featherweight division. Originally from Kurdistan, but now has lived a lot of his life in Finland. 3-0 so far in the UFC. His last fight defeated Mike Wilkinson. However, that was about a year ago. That was at the last UFC London card, Fight Night 84. 9 of his 13 career victories are by submission. Same thing for Mr. Allen. His last fight was also at UFC Fight Night 84, as he was able to defeat Yotzan Meza. 5 of his 11 career victories are by knockout, and he is 2-0 in the UFC. I think, no offense to Mr. Allen, but I think our Americani is one of the best prospects here in the 45 division. Has fought in England before, even though he's going to be kind of the bad guy coming in against Allen. I think Amirkhani is just looking for, he's very close to taking that next step in competition. Obviously, with the year layoff, it'll be interesting. Really, both guys have had a year layoff, so it'll be interesting to see how they come out. I imagine that first round is going to be maybe a little more tentative for both guys. I wouldn't be surprised, and we maybe see a second round start to pick up a little bit. Marcani's slightly taller, 2 inches taller, has a 2-inch reach advantage with the feet and the legs. Both those are measured on the UFC website. And I think his submission skills, having that so many submissions, is a really big difference. And I don't think Allen's faced a guy this caliber of a grappler before, and I think is going to have a tough time dealing with it. And I wouldn't be surprised if Amirkhani walks away with another victory. However, if Allen gets by a guy like Amirkhani, he's a guy that you're going to have to start taking a look at. And obviously with the year layoff and only 2 fights in the UFC, a lot of people don't know who this guy is. So I think the UFC's banking on kind of a see who's the next big prospect in the division. We're going to find out whether it's Arnold Allen or Makwan Amirkhani. Brad Pitt, in what will be his last fight in mixed martial arts, he will be taking on the only fighter from Ecuador in the UFC in Marlon Vera. So far, Pickett has run a UFC record of 5-8, fighting in between the bantamweight and flyweight division. His last fight was a loss to Uriah Faber at Fox 22, and 10 of his 25 career victories are by submission. Looking at Marlon Vera, different Vera, 2-2 in the UFC. His last fight was a win over Gyung Ning at Fight Night 101, and 5 of his 8 career victories are by submission. I think this is actually a pretty even fight. I think at this stage of Pickett's career, he's obviously a guy that is a solid striker, a solid grappler, but I think Rivera is obviously going to be younger, maybe a little stronger. This is a guy who has fought some of his career at 145 pounds, so obviously weight maybe somewhat of an issue trying to weigh in for Vera, but I think that strike advantage could go to Marlon Vera in some of those scramble positions or inside the clinch. And obviously, Vera is a guy looking to prove himself. Obviously, only 2-2 in the UFC. He's trying to look at to break out. Obviously, Pickett's trying to go out on a win, so that could maybe leave Pickett to leave a lot of openings. Maybe he'll get a little more reckless knowing that this is going to be the last 15 minutes he will compete in martial arts, and that could leave some openings for a guy like Marlon Vera, not only in the striking, but a chance to duck down, get a takedown, possibly get a submission and use what I perceive as to be the bigger frame and the stronger frame as well. So it should be an interesting fight. Obviously, Pickett has been a guy that's been towards the top of the division for many years at 135. Was towards the top, didn't have a great run there at 125, just too much weight for him. But obviously, the biggest victory of his career, defeating Demetrius Mighty Mouse Johnson back in the WEC. Had a solid career, one of the few guys, well, not one of the few guys, but as far as lighter weight classes go, and being from England, one of the few guys, below 155 to really kind of make a name for himself in the United States coming out of England. So Pickett, somewhat of a pioneer, especially for British MMA fighters, one of the bigger names that come out of England. So definitely been a great career, and looking forward to seeing One Punch go out one more time. Co-main event of the evening, at 170 pounds, Alan Joe Blay against Gunnar Nelson. Joe Blay had a very technical win over Mike Perry in his last fight. That was at Fox 22 to run his UFC record to 6-2. Overall, 9 of his 15 career victories are by knockout. He's taking on a guy that's pretty much the complete opposite. He has a 6-2 record in the UFC as well, as I mentioned, Gunnar Nelson. His last fight is a victory over Albert Tumanov, which saw him submit Tumanov at Fight Night 87, and 11 of his 15 career victories are by submission. Despite that many submission victories, this fight can actually play out on the feet fairly well. Both guys are actually really good strikers. Gunnar Nelson is a very good karate stylist, used that really wide stance. Obviously, Joe Blay has trained in a couple different striking arts, including Taekwondo. So I think this one can play out on the feet very well. I would say Joe Blay has a little more of that killer instinct, a little more of that knockout power. However, in those scrambles and in close, if that's where the fight goes, Gunnar Nelson obviously is a superior grappler, a jiu-jitsu world champion, and a guy that, if he can get this fight to the ground, whether he's on top or on his back, really favors the Icelandic native. So, really for Joe Blay, he's got to be technical and kind of stay away from the pocket. However, Gunnar's really good at leaping in and leaping out using that lateral side stance, and that may be harder for Joe Blay with that stance to stay on the outside. I would expect Joe Blay to stay on the outside using a lot of leg kicks, maybe switching to go high at times, and really try to use his boxing to kind of keep on the outside with a lot of circling. For Nelson, I think he's got to jump in and jump out, make this thing close, use his boxing to get inside, draw Joe Blay in with the boxing, get the clinch, and look to trip or throw to take down to get this fight to the ground. That's how I see both guys trying to attack each other. And maybe we even see Joe Blay abandon the leg kicks to try to not even get taken down at all. But with the side stance, that leaves that front leg really open for those low kicks, and I think that's something Joe Blay could take advantage of. We'll see if he tries to avoid those kicks altogether, just try to stay with his boxing and circling just to keep away from Gunnar Nelson at all costs, because obviously I can assure you that if this fight goes to the ground, it's all Gunnar Nelson. I don't see Joe Blay putting up as much of a fight against the guy who has a black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, or a high-quality black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu like Gunnar Nelson. Jimmy Manuwa against Corey Anderson. If this stays on the feet, Anderson has developed solid stand-up, but why bother? Why take advantage of a guy that has had 14 knockout victories of 16 fights? This guy has really good power. If you give him the chance to knock you out, he will. I think Corey Anderson takes this fight right to the ground. It's a 5-round fight, but Corey Anderson, I feel, is a guy that's in shape, and I think if this fight goes into the third, well, if it definitely goes in the championship rounds, I think Corey Anderson at that point has already won. I think Manuwa's going to be tired. Obviously, with comes a lot of powers, a lot of energy expended. And I think Manuwa's going to have to spend a lot of energy to not only throw those power shots, but to try to get Corey Anderson, formerly known as Beast in 25-8, which I like a lot better than his new nickname of Overtime, but against the guy that is known for really wrestling and outworking guys in those ground positions. So I think if Manuwa, I think it really has to explode here in the first round, because I really think if it goes really past the first round, I think it's going to be Corey Anderson. It's going to be a lot harder for Manuwa to get out from under Corey Anderson after that end point, and a much harder for him to knock him out at that point, because I just don't think he's going to have the energy. And overall, even if it stays standing, I don't think he has the stamina to go 25 minutes with his style of fighting as well. I think Corey Anderson is just a much better conditioned athlete. So I think for Manuwa, that first round is going to be very important. I think if it goes out of the first round without Manuwa getting a finish, I think Corey Anderson's looking really good to win the fight. with that said, let's get to picks here. UFC Fight Night 107. First fight of the evening, Arnold Allen against Makwan Arukani. Maybe tailed my hand a little bit, but I really like Amarikani. I think he's a bright star in this division. I don't like the fact he's been off a year. However, I just think he's the better all-around fighter, and I think that grappling game is maybe second to none in this division. Charles, however, a left division, but he has a really good ground game, and I don't think Allen's taken on anyone of this caliber, so I'm going to go with Mr. Finland, Amarikani to win. Brad Pickett against Marlon Vera. I'm actually going to go Marlon Vera in this one. I think he's going to be the bigger, stronger guy, and I think Pickett, being his last fight, maybe goes a little more reckless than we've seen him in past to try to force things, and I think Vera is a guy that will be able to take advantage of those situations and possibly get a knockout here, so I'm going to go with Marlon Vera to win this one. Alan Joe Blay against Gunnar Nelson. While I think Joe Blay can do the things necessary to win this fight technical, I think Gunnar Nelson, with that X factor being his jiu-jitsu and grappling game, I think is eventually somehow going to be able to get the fight in that realm and either control or possibly get a submission over the American. So I'm going to go with Gunnar Nelson to take this one. Jimmy Manuwa against Corey Anderson. I think Corey Anderson's going to be able to take down Jimmy Manuwa with relatively ease, hold him there, and if not get a 25-minute decision, I think eventually will break Jimmy Manuwa, just get a knockout from accumulation of strikes from Manuwa breaking, or eventually Manuwa going to roll over, maybe give up his back for a rear naked choke, and that's how I see this one playing out. So I'm going to go with the man formerly known as Beeson 25, now going by overtime, Corey Anderson to win this one. Once again, I'm your host, Jim Graham. You can follow Beyond the Cage on Facebook, facebook.com/Beyond the Cage podcast, and like the page, I should say, not follow, but you follow it too by liking the page and seeing the latest posts, discussions, and of course episodes on facebook.com/Beyond the Cage podcast. You can follow me on Twitter and check out what I'm tweeting about, obviously the show and my thoughts on stuff happening in the world of UFC. Sometimes I'll be live tweeting a lot of the events, which I think I plan on doing once again, as I did last Saturday. This Saturday coming up for World Series of Fighting, as well as UFC Fight No 1-7, so follow me at Jim Graham on Twitter. I'm also on Instagram at the Jim Graham as well. I'd like to thank my partners at TopRatedMMA.com, Izzy Garcia, Flying Bride J, Legends of the K's, Jonathan Snowden, Flow Combat, Sports Talk 313, let's see, AJ Hiller, MMA Signatures USA, MMA Fight Club on Facebook, TheMMACommunity.com, and MMA Fight Fans on Twitter, Gorilla the Bear, Adam Nelson. Hit him up for any of your custom art pieces, whether MMA or comic book related. Please hit him up to get your very own original art piece as well. An amazing artist, by the way. So, once again, I am Jim Graham, and thank you for listening to another edition of Beyond the Cage.